Welcome to the Explainer. When we think about building a nation, our minds usually jump to the big, physical stuff. Cities, roads, all that infrastructure. But what about building a nation's mind? Today, we're going to follow this one powerful idea all the way from a founder's personal bookshelf, through the industrial age, and right into the high-speed think tank that advises Congress today.
So, let's start with the big one. How do you build a country from scratch? It's a huge question, right? It conjures up images of armies, laws, economies, but the answer, or at least where it all begins, might be in a much quieter place. Not a battlefield, not a constitutional hall, but a room just filled with paper, ink, and basically all the collected knowledge of the world. Before you can build anything, you need a blueprint. And for one of America's key architects, that blueprint wasn't just a single document, it was an entire universe of knowledge. He had this pretty radical belief that a government run by the people could only really survive if its leaders had access to the sum of all human thought. And that brings us, of course, to Thomas Jefferson. When we think of him, we think of the Declaration of Independence. But just as important was his personal library. This collection would become the literal and philosophical seed of the Library of Congress. It was basically the source code for the entire American experiment. Now, this idea had a trial by fire, and I mean that literally. The history of this library is this dramatic cycle of disaster and just pure resilience. First, a fire totally wipes out Jefferson's personal collection. Then, during the War of 1812, the British burn the Capitol, and there goes the first Library of Congress. So what does Jefferson do? He sells his own incredible library to the nation to start all over again. But even then, another fire in 1851 destroys 2/3 of those books. But the idea itself? That proved to be fireproof. The idea that a nation must have a library survived. This quote right here, this gets to the very heart of Jefferson's whole vision. When he offered his books to Congress, he was making a really radical argument for the time. He wasn't just selling them some reference materials. No, he was arguing that for a government to actually function in a complex world, its leaders needed access to, well, everything. Every field of study, every philosophy, every debate was relevant. And he absolutely meant everything. I mean, this was not some fancy gentleman's library just for show. It was a working scholar's library. Sure, it had the great works of philosophy and law, but it also had practical manuals on agriculture, science, and even how to brew beer. Jefferson truly believed that rational thought could solve any problem, whether you were forming a democracy or just trying to improve your crops. And his library was the toolbox. Okay, so while this whole intellectual foundation was being laid with books, the nation's physical body was being forged from stone and iron. See, ideas are powerful, but they need infrastructure to become reality. A nation of the mind needed a nation of roads, bridges, and buildings. And it all started at the local level. Places just like this grist mill, these were the engines of early communities. They were the economic hubs that turned grain into flour and farmers into traders. This was the essential backbone of the young nation's economy long before any of those grand federal buildings started to rise. So from these local hubs, the nation started to connect itself. And structures like this bridge, the Connecticut Avenue Bridge, they weren't just about crossing a ravine. Oh no, they were these monumental works of public architecture, powerful statements of permanence and national ambition, designed to show the world that this new country was absolutely here to stay. And this right here illustrates the next step perfectly, building the permanent institutions of federal power. You have to remember, early fires had repeatedly torn through Washington, so the new U.S. Treasury was built to be fireproof, a total fortress of finance, using modern cast iron beams. It was a physical symbol of stability, a monument designed to protect the nation's wealth for centuries. But the challenges of the 18th and 19th centuries, honestly, they were dwarfed by what was coming. The 20th century brought industrialization, world wars, a population boom. The nation didn't just need bridges and buildings anymore, it needed raw, industrial-scale power. And this is the machinery of that modern age. The Potomac River Generating Station, a massive coal-fired plant built in 1949, represents a fundamental shift. We're no longer talking about water wheels here. This is about harnessing immense, industrial-scale energy to fuel the explosive growth of post-war America. Now, this table really reveals the sheer velocity of that growth. Just look at the timeline. In only 8 years, the station added 5 massive generating units, nearly tripling its output. This wasn't just growth. It was an absolute explosion of demand, a really clear indicator of a nation transforming at incredible speed.
So this new, complex industrial world created equally complex problems. Foreign policy, nuclear science, economics, space exploration. I mean, the sheer volume of information was just staggering. Jefferson's brilliant library of old books, it just wasn't enough anymore. To navigate this new reality, Congress needed a new intellectual tool. It needed a living library.
And that's where the Congressional Research Service, or CRS, comes in. This is the modern evolution of Jefferson's vision. Instead of a static collection of books, it's a dynamic think tank of experts, providing objective, nonpartisan analysis directly to lawmakers on demand. As the New York Times put it, the CRS had authorities on, well, everything.
And the CRS was right there at the center of the nation's most critical moments. When the Soviets launched Sputnik, sparking this huge crisis of confidence, the CRS helped Congress draft the act that created NASA. During the chaotic foreign policy crisis of the 1980s, from Beirut to Grenada, it provided the rapid-fire analysis lawmakers needed. It literally became the on-demand analytical brain for a modern superpower.
So the key takeaway here is that these two threats, the intellectual and the physical, the library and the power plant, they're not separate stories. They are one singular narrative. A nation builds itself by creating an ecosystem where ideas and infrastructure grow in tandem, with each one fueling the other.
And you can see a direct, unbroken line from Jefferson's idea right to today. His library was the seed, a comprehensive but static collection for a new republic. The CRS is the evolution, a living, breathing service providing on-demand analysis for a hyper-complex world. The mission, though, is identical, to make sure that the nation's leaders have the knowledge they need to govern. The tools have just evolved with the time. From a founder's bookshelf to a fireproof treasury, from a coal-fired power plant to an on-demand think tank. This ecosystem of knowledge and infrastructure is always evolving. Which really leaves us with a final question. What are the essential tools, the new libraries and power plants that we need to be building right now to serve as the foundation for the next 200 years?